Welcome to the shop. I'm glad you're here. Today we're going to be talking about more marking gauges, and there are several different types, and we're going to talk about one important one that I've just come across. It belongs to a friend of mine, and we're going to take a look at that and see how that's different or special compared to some of these other ones. But I'm glad you're here, and let's get talking about them. Now, for the purposes of this video, the main research that has been done is taken from this book called American Marking Gauges, Patented and Manufactured by Milton H. Batchelor, Jr. It's really the authoritative work on marking gauges as far as a real collection of different gauges and other things. I want to start by kind of reading to you a little bit from this, which is this part about defining what a marking gauge is, because you can see that there are a lot of different types here, but they are all marking gauges. The term marking gauges, used in the title of this book, I'm quoting from the book, is a commonly accepted phrase referring to a number of tools, including marking, mortise, scribe, cutting, slitting, etc. Oftentimes, you'll hear about one that's a slitting gauge or a marking gauge or a depth gauge. All of them in the term gauge is referring to a length of measurement that is either going to be divided, copied, or marked or cut. So, but they always refer to some form of measurement in all of these, and they all have the capacity to repeat a size. So if it's a simple marking gauge, the distance from the face here and the point that would give you the mark, that distance could be repeated on one piece of wood to another piece of wood and to another. But there are other variables. Now, I'm going to go over some of these and the differences in them and their purposes. But the real point of this video is going to be examining a special one, a very rare one. And so let's get through this real quickly, and then we'll get to this little prize right here, and I'll explain it to you. Now, on this end here, we have basic, simple marking gauges. And they have a point, as I just showed you, to do the marking. And that point can be sharpened, can be removed and sharpened. And this gauge here, you see, has a brass plate here, so it won't wear out the wood. It's a little higher end one by Stanley, his sweetheart. And here is your marking point, and here's the face. So you can use this if you wanted to just scribe a line down a board, and if you wanted to just mark for a mortise or something like that. Or you could also set it approximately to the center of the board, just estimating, and then you can run a line like that. I'll darken that line so you can see it, and then you can do another line from the other side, and I'll darken that line, and you can see the two are very close together. So therefore, you could adjust this in and get a center very easily just by moving this bar in and out. So that's a classic marking gauge that we have. In this case, this is a special one made by Derek in London, in England. And it has two systems. Over here is a pencil that goes in. And these are available today. He makes them in different woods, and they're available for sale. This one has a pencil gauge, so you could scribe a pencil line. But on this side, it has a very sharp blade like a sword, and it's a double edge. It's beveled this direction and this. And this one you could use for cutting veneer or doing another thin marking on it if you want. You can see it gives a very fine line there. And so that's sort of a specialty marking gauge that you can get. But as I said, all of these are marking gauges of some sort or another. Even a compass is a marking gauge of some sort, because you can set it to a certain length that you want to mark, and copy, and then you set that, and then you can take that to another piece of work and transfer that measurement to that. So it is also vaguely considered a marking gauge. Stanley made these little ones here. This is called a butt gauge or a butt marking gauge, and its purpose was for door hangers, people who attach hinges, and they need to do a mortise in the jamb and a mortise on the door to hit for the hinge to fit in flush. And these are very handy, and they could be used the same way as I used the other one, but they basically have a gauge here, a mark to show you what this depth is, and there's a rule here. This is a Stanley 95, and so this one you would set for the thickness of the hinge when you're cutting on the side, and you can keep that measurement, and meanwhile you can do the wider measurement for the hinge with this one here, and thereby, if you're doing a couple of hinges or 4 or 5, you have this all set to scribe the jamb, the door, and the width of the butt hinge. So there's that one there. This is a woodpecker pocket rule, but it can also be used as a gauge. You can use it as a depth gauge. A depth gauge is to measure the depth of a hole or a mortise so that you can then make sure that your tenon or your dowel is the right length. And there's all sorts of reasons for using it, but this basically you can loosen up and pull it back and set it in as a depth gauge. You can use it that way, or up here it has a little point to put a pencil, and so you could use it as a scribe in the same way. If I set this to half the thickness of the wood, I can come in here and I can put a pencil and follow that mark to give me a line all the way down. So that, a simple rule, but these little things make it a gauge. This is a height gauge. Woodcraft magazine, I think, put them out. But basically, this is your top, and then you can raise and lower this part. And if you're using a table saw and you want to set the blade up to a certain height each time or something like that, you can set this on the saw or on a router table, and you can reproduce this height over and over. So again, a gauge, a different sort, but still a gauge. This one here is a marking gauge, doing the same thing that we talked about for the wood, but it has a circular cutter here. This is a Wood River brand, and it has a very sharp edge here, and this would be your face. So you could use it this way to, again, mark the center of the board, or you could also use it this way for the depth gauge. So a multi-purpose tool in some ways, but that's another one. And then this one is a copy of a Stanley, and it's got a marking tool here, inside here, and you can use this the same way. Here's a place for a point. You can set it as a triangle or a square to do a 45 cut. You can do it a 90-degree cut. It has a groove here, so you can put a pencil in there and do the line. Again, another gauge. All of them are gauges. This one here is more for metalworking, but you see it's got a cutter here, a square cutter with points. And so this could be slid against a board this way, or it can sit on top of something else and follow a track on this side, and mark the gauge. This also fits in there, and you can use this point here to set a height and then transfer it. So in any case you're transferring a mark in some way. Then you have a thing called a panel gauge. A panel gauge is a similar system, but it has a longer rod. Sometimes it's wooden. In this case it's metal, and you have a fence here and a cutting edge here, which happens to be, in this case, a semi-disc and serrated on one side and sharp on the other. So if you had a large panel that you wanted to scribe a length on, you could use this for that. There are so many different types. This is a Bridge City tool marking gauge, and it serves a couple of purposes. Its main purpose is giving you a center line down a board. There's a cutter here, and then there are these rods that you can go off of if you wanted to follow around something. If you leave it loose, the amazing thing about this one, in simple engineering, is that no matter how you move these two side fences, this cutter is always, this marking point is always centered. So if this was a ballooned out shape rather than being parallel, you could follow it just by bringing it in and leaving these loose, not tightening this down, and then it would follow down the center of the board. Even if the board got wider or smaller, it would still go down the center. And just in that little movement that I did there, I did an automatic perfect center line between these two distances. And that was just keeping the two fences on the board and slowly moving it across. This is a brilliant tool, and it works very well. So I want to get to a couple of things before I get to this tool that I was talking about. And so let me show you some other tools. So I want to talk to you just really quickly about Trammel points. I'm trying to get through some of this stuff so that I don't bore you too much and we don't have a lot of time on what we really want to talk about. But the reason I want to bring up Trammel points is because these are included in this tool, this special tool that I'm going to be talking to you about. What a Trammel point is a single one of these. This is the point here. Now, this is a set of trammels. This is a trammel and this is a trammel. Down here are the points, and the points usually are interchangeable with some that are curved for doing inside dimensions and turn the other way outside dimensions. But they're all basically work on the same principle, which is that you supply a board and you can move it to whatever width you want to copy and then transfer, thereby making it a gauge. And there are large ones like that one, and there are smaller ones like these. This is a set of trammels, a spot to put a pencil if you don't want to use the double points. Some of these came with rods like this. This is attached to this rod. They slide along the rod and can be moved to wherever you want them to. It's a little sticky there. And then this one here has a really interesting method of doing micro adjusting. That's why it has two adjusters, so that you can move this screw here and you can push it out just a little bit rather than just sliding it to where you want. So if you set this to one point, you want to adjust this to another, you have that variability. Then this is a Lufkin one. This is a 48-inch rule here, and this one here is your trammel, and here's the point. And you see there's a little hole there, so you could put a pin in to take that point and exchange it for another. This one has a rule on it so that it gives you some estimate of where you want to be with it. This is angled in, again a trammel. This part here is adjustable in and out, and this part here is angled in so you can get into something tight, because normally you see the shape of the point is a V, like a pencil. So if it was straight, you can't put it up against a ruler and make it tight. So this one here angles in, and that way you can get right up against something there to give a mark. So if you wanted to, you could use them similar to a compass to scribe an arc. And some of these longer ones that have these rods could scribe a larger arc. Of course, the ones that don't have the rod, you can make this board as long as you want. make one the center point, and then you can use it as an arc. In that case, you're not really using it as a gauge. Perhaps you are, a marking gauge of an arc. So I wouldn't exclude that on that. And it's the same thing, similar to a compass. Now, there are other little ones that I haven't gotten to. This is a double rod marking gauge, so that you can have two different marks that you can interchange back and forth, just like with the butt marking gauge. So that's sort of an assortment. It does not all of the marking gauges or cutting gauges. There are many, many more. And there are beautiful wooden panel gauges that are made. And some people make their own marking gauges. They're not terribly difficult to do. And at one time or another, there were craftsmen that just made their own and either threaded a thing so they could tighten it this way, or used a wedge like this way. And then, so there are a lot of variables. But this man that we're going to talk about now, and I'm going to switch the book over from the introduction to this section about George Kenny. George Kenny patented, invented this marking gauge. He was born in 1812, March 14th, 1812. And he started out as a wheelwright, and then he was listed again as a machinist when he was older. Like I said, born in 1812. He was labeled in the trades as a wheelwright from 1842 to 1850. In 1860, he appears in a different census as a machinist. So he's starting to get older, and apparently a very highly skilled man. And then he passed away in 1886. So this is the marking gauge that we want to talk about. And I need to bring you in closer so you can really see the features of this tool. So here's the tool that we're talking about. This is the George Kenny marking gauge. Now, when he first patented in 1870 a marking gauge similar to this, it was not exactly like this. The patent and the product later changed. So there are certain things on this that are not mentioned in the patent of 1870. But it's a fascinating tool nonetheless. We have a rosewood fence here and boxwood here. And we have two beautiful knurled bolts that go through here to tighten them down. And that way you can move them wherever you want, and then just tighten this here. And to begin with, in the inside is another interesting little feature. I'm going to set this down for a second, and I'm going to show you that here it has two grooves to allow you to get over the screws putting it on. The trammel point itself screws into this was really not that well heard of. And the inside is threaded, and the outside is threaded into the wood. So it's a little threaded insert, and then this can go right in there. The other thing is that the tightening of this on the centerpiece, I'm going to drop this out of here, hopefully so you can see what's inside here. There's a little piece, and you can see it in the pictures when I was repairing this one. This one I had to make to duplicate the other, but it's a pad, a pressure pad, and a rod, and inside of this bolt there is a hole that rod goes into to keep it in its place, and then inside here it is actually routed out so it can sit flush in there and not get in the way. Now you can turn these either direction that you want. It doesn't have to be with this bevel to the inside. It can be with the flat side to the outside. So this has so many purposes. We're going to go through them, and I'll try to explain them, and I might even miss some of the other ones. Now, right here, you see there's a hole, and it goes through down here. And what's missing on this gauge is another knurled knob here, and it goes through here. This is threaded, and a point would be protruding here, which would mean then that you could set these two guides in equal distance from that, and you could do what we talked about earlier, which is putting a center line down a board, just by setting these to the proper markings that are on the rod. So if you turn them around the other way so that the flat is towards the inside, you would be working on a board that's square, like this. So it would ride against that and give you a mark. Now, in the case of these bevels here, the reason for that, and I'm not sure if you can really see, but this board here has a flat bevel to it on the side. So if you were going to want to mark off of this bevel a certain line, that's the purpose for these. So that would ride against that bevel. It's a little cumbersome with the points on, but you can remove these as you need to. But that would ride on the bevel and thereby give you an accurate line from the top of the bevel. So that's another use for it. Now, supposedly there is a video somewhere or some sort of research done, and there's somebody that has said how many uses this tool has, and I don't have that information, but I don't think it really matters that we have it. We know that it's a centering tool here, and we know that it is a mortising gauge. We know they're Trammel, so I'm going to pull these off and see if that helps you to be able to see these other things. And I may even have to come in for some more close-ups so that you can see what I'm talking about. Now, there's a little hidden piece in here. You can see there's the place that center point would go. And then over here are three cutters here, one in the middle and two there. And over here is another knife. So if you were just doing a simple mortise, you could set this, and each of these knives have lines here for distance, so you don't have to measure too much. If you wanted to go 3/4 of an inch, you just set it to that line, and then you can come here and you can do a mark that will be 3/4 of an inch from that edge. Let me see if I can darken it a little bit so you can see it. So there's the line, 3/4 of an inch from the edge. And that's using this flat section here and this little cutter right here. Okay, now this is the little hidden part. You need a screwdriver. And the only reason that I know this, it's not referenced in the book that I could tell, but in cleaning this up and repairing it, I pulled this screw out in order to show, to open this end up, to see if I could open up this end. And inside, I found, you see that screw is coming up? And I found a cutter. And so you just take that and you turn it upside down and you put it back in the same hole and threaded. And now you have a knife point, so you could use that knife point for cutting veneers or something like that, and it works the same way that this one did. And on this side here where the knife point is are graduations as well, so you can, for that knife point, you can set what distance you want from your faceplate there. So I'm going to put this back in so I don't cut myself or something. It's a pretty sharp little razor knife, and you can tell that by the close-ups. And you can look at those while I'm trying to put this one back in. It's a little touchy. There it goes. And you never want to force anything with any of this stuff. If it's not moving easily, then you're probably lined wrong. So that screw there has another cutter. And the graduations here are all for that cutter there. So let me turn this around this way and show you this other side. I'm going to move the rosewood fence in a little bit, I think completely out of our way, and I'm going to show you this portion here. Now, here is a cutter, and it's fixed by this screw and this screw. It does not move. But inside here, there's a threaded rod, and so it's going to be hard to see here, but there's a cutter here and a cutter here, one here and one here. I'll do this way now, and I'll do a close-up as well. As a matter of fact, why don't I just walk in with this so you can see. Basically where I want you to look is at this area here, and I'm going to be turning this and you'll see the adjustment. So let's come in a little bit, see if I can get us lined up here. So here is the rod. That's the adjuster. And you see, this is the center fixed knife here and here. And then you can see here's a cutter and here's a cutter. So these are centered. This point here is centered between these two. And so when I turn this one rod, see how they're getting wider? They're moving away from that center point. Or if I turn it the other way, I can move it closer in and closer in, and thereby work off a center of a board, or using my faces, and I can do a mark for a mortise. Center doesn't move. These move in conjunction with this, like that Bridge City tool one, where as long as this is centered, these will follow equally to give you the width of a mortise centered on this point. So that's this part here that I was talking about. And here are the graduations. Now, it happens to be at the 7-inch mark from the other end. And there's the parallel points that I was talking about. And if I turn it around, right here, there is a cutter right here at the same line as that one, but separate graduations. So you can take this one and you can set this to whatever distance you want from this cutter back, and that would give you 1 point. So now we're getting to where, like the butt mortise tool, that you can have a couple of different ones. Over here, you see, there is a cutter at the 0 point. So you can adjust this boxwood one here to a different distance, and you have a marking gauge at this end, and you have a marking gauge at this end on the bottom, so that you can do two different thicknesses or widths as you like, and then you have the centering point here. This tool just has so many different things. I'd be hard pressed to tell you how many. This is really nicely done here, matching here, and here. They are a little bit different. These are hand-turned and hand-knurled pieces. You have to think in terms of the time span. The boxwood also has the little grooves, and the mechanism inside is the same for being able to get it off past these screws without having to remove them. So there it is. I'll put it back together and show you some other pictures. So here is the patent drawing for G. Kenny, gauge and dividers. Note that they call them gauge and dividers. And the divider part is something that we didn't talk about, and that's basically using the Trammel points as a set of dividers. Another use for that. Patented January 4th, 1870. And you see there are no trammels, and there's a single wooden piece in the middle, a fence in the middle, but it does give you some information on how this mechanism here works inside of with the pad, the brass pad that we replicated. As well, it shows you having that other cutter and the system for making this equal distanced part go across. And then here's the end shot of it. And it's missing a couple little things like the two grooves to get it over the screws. But so there's the patent, and here's the item a little bit different. And when he lived in and had a carriage making business in New Hampshire in Milford, here you can see here was his carriage shop right here in the map, and over here is where he lived. So he only lived about a block from it. But this is really a great book, I have to say. So that's about it on this piece. I had to do quite a bit of cleaning up. As you can see the pictures in there, you'll see where it's a little darker and a little lighter. And there were some repairs that I had to make to the boxwood and to the rosewood wooden parts. The problem was that in making those repairs, you had to be very careful because there was not a lot of clearance, so you couldn't squeeze together and clamp it or anything like that. But I'm going to put at the bottom of this, or at the end of this video, I'll throw in some pictures of it when I got it, and you can compare it to what it is now. I didn't try to get it back to being, brand new. I just wanted it to function properly, and so I can return it back to my friend who owns it, and I hope he gets years and years of life out of it. I'm hoping that someday he'll either find this middle piece or have somebody machine it properly to match what the rest is. But it's a beautiful tool. And while these are all marking gauges, you can see why this is exceptional. It really is well thought of and well thought out. And the man who patented the design, George Kenny, must have been quite an individual. So at any rate, thanks for coming to the shop. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I know it's a little longer than most, but I think that there's some great information in it. And I hope that you guys, if you spot this at a flea market or something, you'll snatch it up and play with it. So thanks again for coming to the shop. And till I see you again, everybody take care of yourselves and your friends.